My spoiled brother stole my credit cards to impress his trophy wife, but she wasn't so impressed when they drained Grandpa's trust fund to settle my lawsuit. I used to think the worst thing my brother did was crash my dad's car at 15 and blame it on a raccoon. Yes, a raccoon, no typo. But that was just a warm-up. Now he's graduated to the big leagues, identity theft and credit card fraud. No raccoon to pin this one on. My brother, Douglas, is 4 years younger than me. It's not a huge gap, but growing up it felt massive. I was the responsible one. Douglas was addicted to instant gratification. My parents are to blame, they spoiled him rotten. While I worked weekends at a hardware store in high school to save for a car, Douglas got one handed to him the moment he passed his driving test. Well, after the raccoon incident, which, by the way, nobody bought, when he turned 21 he announced he was getting married. This wasn't a long-term girlfriend. He introduced us to his fiancée at a family dinner like it was no big deal. Oh, and they were getting married. She was 31, stunning, decked out head to toe in designer brands. Her name was Maria. I remember my mom choking on her salad when she heard Maria's age. My dad recovered quickly, probably because Maria flashed a smile that could melt ice. Douglas told us not to be foolish, that a real man doesn't care about age and takes bold steps when he knows what he wants. I asked how long they'd been dating. 2 months, he said. After that, Douglas became obsessed with looking rich, not being rich, just looking it. Suddenly he was wearing $1,000 watches, flashy designer sneakers, and posting photos of 5-star dinners and imported champagne. His Instagram looked like a luxury travel influencer's, except there was no logical way he could afford it. He worked part-time at a co-working space and occasionally resold electronics online, but nothing steady. When I asked if he was financially okay, he brushed it off, saying Maria had expensive tastes and he had to step up to keep her. That's what real men do, he said, provide. I asked what exactly he was providing with his part-time job in Honda Civic. He got defensive, saying I'd never understand because I was too scared to take risks, stuck in my boring life while he lived large. Then the credit card statements started arriving, cards I hadn't applied for. At first it was small charges, $42 at a restaurant I didn't know. Then a luxury watch I didn't buy. Then a 2-night stay in a premium suite in Las Vegas. I called the bank to freeze the card, filled out the forms, and got a replacement. Then it happened again. And again. 3 different cards, all maxed out. Over $20,000 in charges. I remember sitting on my couch, staring at the latest statement, a numb feeling in my chest. Nothing made sense. I'd always been careful. Secure information, strong passwords, 2-factor authentication. I started digging for a connection. Then I saw it, a delivery address on one of the invoices. It wasn't mine, it was Douglas's. When I showed up at his place unannounced a few days later, Maria wasn't there. He opened the door with a smug look, like he was about to offer me a beer and show off his new watch. He played dumb. I told him I had proof, including an online order where he'd misspelled my name trying to sign it digitally. He said he didn't mean for it to go this far, but he was desperate. Maria expected a certain lifestyle, and he couldn't let her down. I had good credit, he said, I'd be fine. Yeah, I had good credit until now. He told me not to start drama, that his relationship was important. I said I wasn't there for drama, I was there to let him know I was pressing charges. He'd committed federal fraud and should get a good lawyer. He went quiet for a second, then asked if I could wait until he sorted something out. I left because, at that point, there was nothing left to say. After that confrontation I went home, sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. Douglas wasn't just immature anymore, he'd crossed a line. I needed to make sure everything was airtight before moving forward. I pulled every bank statement, checked every email, traced every unauthorized transaction. It was terrifying how easy he'd made it. He'd probably gotten my social security number years ago, maybe from using my laptop or snooping through old files at mom and dad's. He used a different shipping address but filled out applications with my name, job details, even my emergency contacts. He wasn't even subtle. Some accounts were linked to disposable Gmail addresses with his birth year in them. One even had his own phone number by mistake. It was sloppy, stupid, and criminal that I called the non-emergency police line and asked how identity theft cases like mine are handled. They explained the report process, the documentation needed, and how cases are referred to the district attorney once the bank confirms fraud. Then they asked if I knew the suspect. I said yes, it was my brother. The woman on the phone asked if I was prepared to press charges against a family member. I didn't care that he was family. He'd used multiple cards in my name and I wanted him to pay. 2 days later, I met with a fraud investigator and handed over everything. Documents, emails, delivery receipts, screenshots of Douglas wearing clothes bought with my stolen cards. For the first time, someone took it seriously without asking if I was sure about reporting a relative. But not everyone did. Once Douglas realized I wasn't bluffing, the family guilt trip began. Started with Mom. She called early in the morning saying she'd spoken to Douglas. She asked if it was true. I said yes and explained what he'd done. Multiple cards, over $20,000 each, how I was spending hours fixing my credit history and dealing with fraud departments while he lived like a king with his 31-year-old girlfriend on his arm. She said he was going through a rough patch, that marriage was a lot for him, that maybe Maria pressured him to spend beyond his means. I asked what part of this was my problem. She said involving the police was the last thing I should have done because it drags the whole family into it. I told her the family was already broken the moment Douglas put my financial life at risk just to impress someone who didn't even know her designer bags were bought with stolen money. She tried to spin it, saying he was young, immature, and made a mistake, that I should have compassion. I know she's my mom, but I told her to shut up. This 21-year-old married man with the brain of a mosquito knew how to commit credit card fraud but didn't know it was a crime with consequences? She asked me to imagine just for a second the consequences if he ended up with a criminal record. I said those consequences sounded fine to me. Then she handed the phone to Dad. Dad went straight into lecture mode. He said blood was thicker than a few dollars Douglas had spent, that it wasn't like he'd hurt anyone. I pointed out it was easy for him to say when it wasn't his credit score in ruins. Douglas had spent nearly $60,000 across all the cards. Do you have that money to pay it back? I asked. Of course he didn't. But in his grand display of love and understanding, he offered to co-sign a loan in my name to cover it. I hung up when he said it was a good idea and I should think about it. I can imagine my mom asking him after I hung up, "Do you think he'll take it?" I think he's considering it. The next day I got a letter, well, an email, but it read like a letter. It was from Douglas, or so the sender said. The tone didn't sound like him. It sounded like Maria, formal, distant, vaguely manipulative. It said he was sorry for any inconvenience, that he'd been under pressure and made bad decisions. He was willing to pay me back in installments, maybe $100 a month, if I could be patient. I did the math. At that rate, it'd take 50 years to recover $60,000, not counting interest. Unless my brother and I are Methuselah, that deal made no sense. He wanted to pay off a federal crime in installments. I texted him to pitch that proposal to the DA. If they accept it, I might too. I don't think he's dumb enough to send an admission of guilt, but with him it's like a Disney movie, anything's possible. All that's missing is him breaking into a catchy song with talking animals mid-trial. The only $100 I'd accept is 100 kicks to his backside as punishment, delivered with steel-toed boots. In installments, 1 per week, for maximum satisfaction. Update 1. The funny thing about cleaning up someone else's mess is you uncover the things they tried to bury deepest. I was neck-deep in emails, legal documents, and bank statements, building a timeline for the fraud investigators. I needed to be precise. The stronger the case, the less room my family had to guilt-trip me later. In the chaos, I found it. An old letter, nearly thrown out, mixed in with some of my dad's estate papers from a couple of years ago. I thought they were mine when I moved out. It was addressed to Douglas, from our grandfather, my dad's father. He died when we were teens, and honestly I never knew him well. Distant, formal, the kind of old school guy who thought kids should be seen, not heard. I always thought he favored Douglas. This confirmed it. The letter explained that Grandpa had set up a trust fund for Douglas when he turned 18. It was private, managed by an external firm, and set to release over $150,000 when he turned 30, unless a serious circumstance required earlier intervention with the trustee's approval, a lawyer who'd handled Grandpa's affairs since his death. It was meant as a safety net, not a get-out-of-jail-free card for felonies. But in that moment, that fund was the perfect solution to fix what Douglas broke. I contacted the firm listed in the documents. At first, they were tight-lipped about privacy, but once I provided the documents, the police report, the fraud complaints, and evidence linking Douglas to the crime, their tone changed. The trustee got involved personally. He said Douglas had never requested early access in all the years the fund was active, but agreed this qualified as a serious circumstance. He asked what I wanted. I said I wanted the full amount Douglas owed, credit card debt, fines, legal fees, paid directly from the fund through the court. I made it clear I'd still pursue legal action. This wasn't a clean slate. It was about ensuring Douglas couldn't slip away again. The trustee, Leonard, agreed, saying Douglas had already gotten more leniency than he deserved. A week later, I called Douglas on FaceTime. I didn't want to, but I needed to see his face when I told him. He answered like nothing had happened, like I was his big brother calling to catch up. He asked if I was ready to be reasonable. I said I was being perfectly reasonable after talking to Grandpa's trustee. He went silent for half a second, then asked what that had to do with anything. I told him about the trust fund, how it had enough to cover every dollar he stole and more, that the trustee agreed to release it to pay the damages, not because Douglas asked but because the court would demand it. Then I hit him with the rest. The charges were filed and this wasn't going away. Even with the debt paid, the crime remained. He said I had no right to touch that money, that it was his future, that Grandpa left it to him, not for my personal vendettas. Too bad, my credit score was my future too. He called me bitter, jealous, said I'd always envied how much people liked him. I said people also like fireworks until they see how fast they burn out and what's left behind. Then he lost it, yelling that I'd ruined everything, that Maria had left him. She said she didn't marry to be with a broke man under criminal investigation. He asked if I was happy now. I'll admit I was a little happy. Seeing an entitled person face consequences always brightens your day. Right now he can choose to pay his debts and hope the DA goes easy, or wait for the court to order the trustee to pay for him. Update 2. I should have known it wouldn't end with Douglas. How naive to think a shred of basic decency would be enough. When the golden child crashes, the whole family dives under the rubble to cushion the fall. Once word spread that his precious trust fund was being used to clean up his mess, my phone started ringing like a siren. Mom asked how I could do this. I said it wasn't hard, just a few phone calls, but that wasn't the answer she wanted. To her, I'd taken something beautiful Grandpa left for Douglas and used it for myself. Not one of them stopped to wonder why Grandpa left me nothing. I agreed it was beautiful. Losing it would be a beautiful lesson for Douglas. She called me cruel, said I knew how much he depended on that fund, that it was his safety net, his chance to get ahead later in life. Maybe if he hadn't spent the last few months playing sugar daddy to a woman who only stayed for his fake money, he wouldn't be in this mess. She tried the "you're crossing a line" card again. So I told her straight, if it hurt so much to touch the trust fund, she was welcome to pay the debt herself. I offered to send her the total, which had grown with interest thanks to her calls. Maybe she and Dad could split it to preserve Douglas's inheritance. I had to end the call soon after because I couldn't handle her crocodile tears for her golden boy. 2 hours later, Dad showed up at my house. I could have handled his disappointment, a valid feeling for any parent with a son like Douglas. Instead, he said he was disappointed in me. He said this was getting out of hand, that Douglas was already falling apart and had learned his lesson, that Maria left him, that his job prospects were ruined. No need to leave him penniless now. Sure, it was fine to leave me penniless, but heaven forbid someone touches the spoiled kid. He tried saying Douglas didn't understand what he was doing, that he was overwhelmed. I called it an absurd excuse. That night, I got an email from the fraud department. The reimbursement process was officially approved. The trust fund would cover the full repayment, legal fees and fines. Between the stolen money, interest, penalties and attorney fees, Douglas can kiss his money goodbye. We know my parents couldn't discipline him, but now the justice system will do its job. Update 3. I didn't expect to hear from Douglas again after all this. He'd already gotten a taste of what happens when he messes with me. 3 weeks after the fund was drained, he sent a voice message. He sounded broken. He said he didn't blame me anymore, that maybe if someone had confronted him years ago, he wouldn't be in this situation. He just said he was sorry that he'd show up to the hearing and hung up. He's paying everything up front to reduce the charges to a minimum when the case goes to trial. It's the most mature thing I've heard him say in a long time. That's how he should have sounded if my parents had disciplined him for blaming a raccoon when he crashed the car, instead of rewarding him with a new one. My parents haven't spoken to me since Dad came to my house. Then one afternoon I ran into my aunt at the grocery store. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost, then hugged me. She said she'd heard what happened and was proud of me for standing my ground. She said the extended family supported my decision, tired of my parents' favoritism toward Douglas, and Grandpa's toward my dad and brother. Douglas didn't show up after the hearing. He spent a short time in jail, then got community service. I heard from a cousin he moved west, working odd jobs off the books. Maria's gone. Their marriage was annulled. It didn't even last long enough to need divorce lawyers. My parents still aren't talking to me, but this year I got a Christmas card from my aunt. It's on my fridge. Update 4. My mom finally reached out after months of silence. It wasn't a real apology, but she asked how I was. She said she'd thought about calling earlier but didn't know what to say, that things at home had been tough. She missed me, said last Christmas didn't feel like Christmas without me. But it sounds like even Douglas didn't spend Christmas with them. My parents have lost 2 sons, all because of a woman who ditched Douglas after making him spend thousands, then vanished to find her next financial victim. If that gold digger at least opened Douglas's eyes, I can't hold too much of a grudge. Aside from the credit card fiasco, which was likely 100% his idea, she didn't do anything to me directly. If this makes Douglas get an honest job, become hardworking, and stop acting like the golden child, I couldn't ask for more. My parents still can't see the damage they caused Douglas, let alone me. They think he's a poor victim, that I should have backed down, that it's all unfair to them. But if anyone's to blame, it's them. At least my credit score's back to normal, my cards are being used responsibly, and from what I hear, Douglas is living a better life. Update 5. I occasionally hear things about Douglas and they're usually good, like he's holding down an honest job or found someone who's not like his ex-wife. It makes you think the only thing wrong with him was our parents' lack of discipline, that beneath the golden child facade they built over the years, he's a decent person. But this update is more about my parents than him, since he's still out of our lives. It now makes sense why they spoiled him so much or were so worried about the trust fund being used. They didn't get anything from Grandpa's estate either, but hoped Douglas would share the loot. That's why they pampered him, why they treated him with such affection despite everything he did that deserved punishment. The worst part? If my lawsuit hadn't touched that money, Douglas likely wouldn't have shared it with them either. When he was old enough to access the funds, he'd probably have felt entitled to it all, and my parents wouldn't have seen a cent. The more you indulge your golden child expecting a payout, the less you get. I learned this through my aunt as my parents confessed to her about their financial struggles. Struggles caused, I assume, by blindly spoiling Douglas for years.